right, welcome and thank you for joining Security and Resilience for Zoos and Aquariums. I'm Ashley Zielinski, Director for the Zoo and Aquarium All Hazards Partnership. Before we begin, I want to just go through a couple of logistical reminders for everyone. The meeting is being recorded and we will have that available online afterwards, as well as sending that link via email to attendees and registrants. All attendees are muted and listening only mode. But we do invite you to participate through the chat feature and to submit questions through the Q&A, which show up at the bottom of your screen. If you do need to speak or you have something to share, you can also request to do that and we can allow you to speak that way. You should see live transcription is enabled for the webinar at the bottom of the screen. If you find this distracting or it bothers you, you can disable it and view a full transcript in a separate window or change the settings by clicking the caret next to that at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey Murray, Protective Security Advisor for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Thanks for joining us today and welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Ashley. It's my pleasure. This is a lot of fun. Let's see. As introduced, and I appreciate you trying to get through the tongue twister of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That takes a little bit of practice. But it's an honor to speak with you today. I think you're going to get a lot out of what we have to offer. I'm going to do just a quick run through for those of you that are less familiar with CISA. We're kind of new. We used to be called the National Protection and Programs Directorate, or NPPD, and they reshuffled stuff and created this new organization with a big focus on cybersecurity. But when it comes to infrastructure security, there's certainly plenty worth protecting and lots of work to do as far as that goes. A little bit of background on me, so you know kind of where I'm coming from. I started out in the Marine Corps doing counterintelligence with them through most of the 90s, and then was a police officer in South Florida, city of Hollywood. I was a SWAT officer, a hostage negotiator, and a neighborhood team leader there, so kind of broad swath uniform law enforcement. Then post 9/11, DHS stood up. And in 2005, I started with DHS working in their National Operations Center, doing intelligence for them. They needed intel folks, and that's how I got recruited into that. And then I've been a protective security advisor for since 2009, and actually just recently became the acting chief of protective security for our region. So if you are in the Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, or New Mexico states, our protective security advisors are at your beck and call for that. But anywhere else in the country, we have other regions, and there's protective security advisors assigned to every state. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself when we start talking about the PSAs, because there's a whole section on that here in a second. So a little bit of promotional material, if you will, on CISA. Our vision and the mission. The big takeaway that we try and promote is that we're the nation's risk advisors. So we understand the risks that are out there, so threat, vulnerability, and consequence, and advise folks on that. So minimal, really, really tiny when it comes to regulatory stuff, and that usually has to deal with bulk chemical. So if you have a facility, and I doubt that any of you do, that have just an obscene amount of deadly or explosive chemicals, we have inspectors that will come and help you improve your security. The entire rest of everything that we offer, to include the protective security advisors, any of our cybersecurity advisors, any of the exercise support that we offer is not regulatory, 100% voluntary, and it's free. So, that's always kind of I don't want to bury the lead as far as that goes, but if there's anything that I say that we offer here, there's no charge for that whatsoever. And so CISA, our mission space is the federal network protection. So if anything that has a .gov end to their address is on the federal network, and so we work at protecting that. We provide cyber protection to a certain degree, where we have cybersecurity advisors, and again, we'll unpack that a little later in the presentation as well, that are available to assist with cybersecurity. And then the infrastructure and resilience and field operations is where the protective security advisors live and work. And then we have an emergency communications function, which seems kind of strange, but then they've kind of shown up to the party a little later and are really interesting. So anything to do with 911 call centers, their security protection is in their wheelhouse. So that's pretty interesting addition to our mission by becoming CISA. As far as a core competency, what we're doing right now is what we call partnership development. We want to, I don't hate, but it's a little awkward saying, preach the good word. I don't want to come off as evangelical. Some really like that, some don't. But we try and promote the building of partnerships across the public and private sectors, across the state and local governments, so that there's a more unified effort in being prepared and building resilience. So that's kind of why we're doing here. If you are unaware, the 16 infrastructure sectors are in there. If you're wondering where zoos and aquariums fall in, it's somewhere between food and agriculture and commercial facilities, kind of depending on the nature of the organization. And so there is that, we certainly see the value in the import in that. We also work in what we call community lifelines. And this was born out of Hurricane Harvey, where there was, we had to prioritize stuff. And then, if you're chasing down 16 things, that can be pretty challenging, where we rebucketed them, if you will, for disaster response and preparedness into the 7 that we see here. And so while you wouldn't necessarily see zoos and aquariums in here, please don't take that as anything as a slight. It was just a matter of there was so few resources available. When it comes to that, we really had to root down. If it makes you feel any better, banks aren't on there either. So there you go. Let's see. All right, so protective security advisors, and again, I'm going to try and shoot through this so we can spend a whole lot of time on the infrastructure survey tool in particular, but some of the other assessments that we have available that you may find useful. But as protective security advisors, we're there for you. That is the root of all of that. We are the face of DHS assigned to a district. Texas, for example, has a whole slew of PSAs, giant state. So there's 2 of us covering just North Texas, but North Texas is 85 counties, larger than the state of Massachusetts. And so tons of infrastructure there. Houston is a smaller district, but has 2 PSAs there because there is nothing but refineries wall to wall, and we do a lot of work as far as that goes with them. So we also have a PSA in Austin, San Antonio, and El Paso. And so know that your local protective security advisor is not too far away if you're looking for that kind of support. And so in our mission space, we do vulnerability assessments, we provide the training, and they just kind of promote products and services, but has more to do with, and I'll show you a website you can go to see all of our products and services. But we much rather you look at what you need, right? Because we're not regulatory. We don't want to come in and say, well, you need to do the X, Y, and Z. We'd much rather you take a look at what we have to offer and then say, hey, these things look interesting or something that we could do now. And what do you think? And so that advisory component is more than just kind of a sales thing. Every once in a while, they'll be like, we sell DHS products. I'm like, they're free. You don't have to sell free stuff. So think of it more as an advisory role, focusing on that part. Let's see. Want to kind of keep moving. But yeah, so plan and coordinate security surveys and assessments. That's a lot of that. Doing outreach activities. We certainly do from a public gathering perspective. And again, zoos and aquariums are a great big deal. If you didn't know, lots of people like coming to zoos and aquariums. So that would make that very interesting and well in our wheelhouse as far as support goes. So if you don't think, like, well, we're not a very big zoo or we're not a very big aquarium, it doesn't matter because you gather crowds. And, the last thing you want to do is not protect those that are coming to your facility. Because I can tell you the bad guys are looking for soft targets. Going back to my law enforcement career, there's kind of the, whether you call it efficient or lazy, take your pick. The criminals are either of those. And so if it's an easy target, they're going to exploit that. And so we want to make everybody a little bit more difficult of a target so that the bad guys have to really work hard, and the harder they work, the more likely they are to expose themselves and show us that they're up to no good. And then we can act upon that before an act happens. So that's some of that. When we talk about national special security events or SEER, special event activity rating, that's more of a kind of an internal to DHS that determines what kind of support you would get federally. Some folks get really excited about, I want to have a really high SEER rating, and I'll tell you that it doesn't come with money, and it comes with a lot of feds telling you how to do your business. And so I try and talk folks out of getting too excited about getting listed as a SEER event. However, if those are resources that you need, don't hesitate to reach out to your protected security advisor, and we can start working through some of that. We do respond to incidents. It's smack dab in the middle of hurricane season. And so, we got our fingers crossed, and we're lighting candles as fast as we can to have a much less impactful hurricane season than we did last year. And so that seems to be our big thing, but it really is any kind of incident. We've certainly had more than our fair share of cyber incidents, and we've not necessarily the PSA specifically, but CISA has responded to those as well. And then, it's kind of a non sequitur, but really kind of a nice product that we have available is supporting improvised explosive device awareness and the training that goes with that. And again, I'm going to give you a link to a website here in a second that lists all of that out, and you can kind of peruse and see what you like. But the Office for Bombing Prevention manages all of that awareness and training for us, and it is really quite good. So we want to make sure that gets a shout out. We've talked about this stuff in kind of a different format, but I do want to show you, and again, it's a bit of an eye chart. Don't get crazy about it. I'm just showing you that there are a lot of PSAs. There's one in every state, and in most cases, there's more than one. Especially for your larger states, California, Texas, Florida, New York, just have a pile. And so, like I said, your protected security advisor is not too far away. If you're familiar with the FEMA regions, those are actually called the federal regions, and we are aligned with that. We do a great deal of work with our FEMA partners in all of our regions, so it makes mirroring them much easier to coordinate, and so that's how that goes. So here's a website I'm talking about. Again, simple Google search for DHS hometown security. And it lands there. We promote the whole connect, plan, train, report philosophy, and you'll see how that carries through to the infrastructure survey tool. But all of our products are there, so please do yourself a huge favor, spend a little time looking through this site and seeing what there is for you there. And again, a lot of it is very, very good, and it is no cost. It'll certainly require your time and coordination, but as far as there being any kind of contract or a fee or anything like that, doesn't exist. So getting into the meat of the matter, one of the biggest things that the protective security advisors do is assist visits. And that's kind of our general term for all the surveys and assessments that we provide. It is, in my opinion, as a taxpayer, this is something that nobody else can do, whether it's public sector or private sector. This is not any, when we kind of start delving into the IST, this is not anything you can get anywhere else for any amount of money. And so, I want to kind of pause a second and let that sink in, where here's this really great decision supporting, well-researched, highly useful product that you get for free from the federal government. And so, there aren't too many places that can say that. And so it gives me kind of a little bit of swell of pride to say that is the case when it comes to that. And so we've spun off a few things from the infrastructure survey tool, not the least of which was what we're calling a security assessment at first entry, or SAFE. So think of it as like, I used to call it a diet IST, but we don't do diet anymore. Apparently it's an IST 0. So, or a no sugar IST. So whatever works for you as far as that goes. But the philosophy remains the same. And that's really kind of the important part as we go. Not to tease you along too much longer, but I also want you to know that in partnership with the protective security advisors, we have what's called the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Program, or PCII. And PCII is based on the Critical Infrastructure Information Act. It is a cornerstone of what we do. If if you cooperated with a PSA and said, here's, all my parts, good, bad, and ugly. What do you think we should do? And then I would post that to Twitter. In about 30 seconds, no one would ever take my call again. And so by having PCII, it is an agreement with us, so that the onus is on us, not on you, that we won't share your data with anybody. And as a result, this protects, when it comes to Freedom of Information Act or FOIA requests, state, local, tribal, territorial disclosure laws like sunshine laws, use in civil litigation or regulatory purposes. They're never going to get that from us. And we won't tell anybody, who we've done work with when it comes to that. And trust me, I have very good friends of mine that are regulators, and we don't talk about that at all because they know how serious we are about it. Because as soon as we start turning over anybody's vulnerability information, whether we post it publicly or turn it over to a regulator or any of that kind of stuff, the relationship becomes very tense as far as that goes. And so what that allows us to do is be the consolidator of an enormous amount of vulnerability data. And when it comes, if you work in data, there's qualities of data, and it's based on the source. And so when it comes to the infrastructure survey tool and the data that comes from that, that's been collected by protective security advisors who've received extensive and lengthy and in times monotonous training to make sure that that data is as good as it can possibly be. And so it's probably a little too far to say it's the gold standard, but it is pretty darn good when it comes to that. And we use that data quite a bit. And then we leverage that for you in a very anonymous fashion so that you can see kind of how you rack and stack compared to your peers, but anonymously. They don't know that you're in the group, that you don't know who's in the group that you're being compared to. And I'll get into that, but that's why PCII is so important, because we leverage that data to give you information that informs those decisions. And so understand that PCI is 100% voluntary, as with everything that we do. If you want to do this, we do require you to, if we're going to collect your data, you have to enter into a PCI agreement with us, especially when it comes to an IST. However, if you just want your information listed as for official use only, we can certainly do that. But if you're not a federal government entity, then I highly encourage you to do that, because if we only protect it under FOUO, then it could be subject to a FOIA request, and we would be required to turn your data over. And we certainly don't want to do that. So it's very few and far between that anybody insists on FOUO, and we make a good case for agreeing to participate in PCII. Now, PCI is not a classification. I'll make sure I don't hit that and stuff. Okay, so PCI is not a classification. There isn't, we would ask that you protect the information, but it's not secret. It's a handling caveat that says, hey, there is pretty sensitive vulnerability information in here, and you should treat it accordingly. It is also your data. So when we do an IST, and again, we'll unpack all of what that is and what that looks like, it's yours. You can do with it as you please. If you have just a rocking relationship with your responders for your facility, the police, fire, EMS, emergency management, public works, whoever may be involved in supporting your facility and improving the security there, you can show this to them. There isn't any limitation to who you share it with, but we, under no circumstances, will provide that to anybody, or in most cases, acknowledge we even did any work with. We get asked that question, especially if someone is new to this, and it's reasonable to want a reference and ask for, say, who can I call and get kind of a sense of what they're about? And we'll say, I don't know. I can tell you we've done a lot of work, and if you call around, I'll tell you won't make more than 6 or 7 calls before you find somebody that has heard of, if not participated in, an IST, especially in any kind of public gathering type facility. And so there is that. So the infrastructure survey tool, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I was hoping to have a live kind of web demo. You're not going to miss anything. You'll completely understand what I'm talking about as far as that goes. But I think my Zoom is just sucking up too much bandwidth to let me to log into that. And it's really, I have to be very careful when I'm doing the dashboards because I'm a total dork when it comes to this data and what it'll do. And so it would have been a lot of watching me click on stuff and say, isn't this neat? And, it's Friday afternoon and I'm very cognizant of that. And so I think it's for the greater good that that's not working, but we will talk about, and you'll completely understand what a survey tool is, an infrastructure survey tool is, and what it can do for you by the end of this. And so it is web-based. We will get another username and password that you'll have to track, but it's well worth the price of admission, so to speak. Designed to characterize and illustrate the vulnerabilities of a facility. Within that, we collect physical security information, security force, some of the bigger things that I think have a greater impact, because it's not, if all you're interested in is gates, guards, and guns, there's no shortage of checklists and security surveys that are out there to say, if you have a guard force, that's good, check, and move on there. But we look at security management. So what kind of plans do you have in place? What does that look like? Information sharing, like what does your network look like? And not in a cyber sense, but necessarily like who are you friends with? What does your circle of friends look like? Are you connected to all the right people that should be giving you very good information? And are you sharing information with them? We talk about protective measures. So is there other things in place when it comes to how that works? And then dependencies. And I've found, and I've done well over 100 of these infrastructure survey tools, that very few people have a very, especially the security folks, have a sense of like, where does water come into the facility? What about natural gas, power, those kind of things? What are you really dependent on to stay open? And if I interrupt any of those things, what happens? Do you close? Is there a significant threat to life? All those kind of things kind of unpack from there. So it's really handy. And so the data categories that we're looking at, and again, not to bore you with lists and lists of stuff, but to show you how, in my opinion, sophisticated, how broad the look is that we go into that. I want to kind of go through these. Now, I do want to pay attention and have you look at the asterisks. Those are the areas where you are compared to your peers. And that's really interesting to see, and we'll kind of show how that works. And so, but these are all the different categories. We get just good background information on the facility. Who participated in the survey? We always like having the responders participate in this because they always tend to learn more. It's not uncommon where we talk to, have you had the police department out? Oh yeah, they were here, when something got vandalized or a car got broken into. And I'm like, that's not really what we're looking for. Like, I understand where you're coming from, and it's good that you have that point of contact, but do you bring them in and walk them around? Kind of tapping into my SWAT background. In our city, we didn't have neither a zoo nor an aquarium. However, we had no shortage of public gathering places. And, especially when it comes to like amphitheaters or any of that kind of stuff, if you have a back of house area and you haven't walked your responders through it, it's an even bet that they have no idea that there's a back of house area. And so providing them a walkthrough or a look at those kind of things is really important. And I can't imagine, especially for some of you, your back of house is just fraught with stuff that responders should know and be very careful of. Like, don't get too close to this cage because that thing will eat your head, is an example of, things that they should be aware of. And so it's one of the things I hate about Zoom. I put a joke out there and I wish there was like a little, everybody's laughing or that joke didn't land kind of thing. But in any event, but you can see, we talk about, facility overview. What does that look like? Who do you share information with? What protective measures do you have in place currently? We talk about criticality. This is becoming a bigger and bigger topic, and I'm hoping that we really start to capitalize on this more as far as what happens if something happens to your facility? Like, who gets excited? what is the damage, and what goes into that. And that's a really good, I like that part of the survey, and it really sparks some really interesting conversation. Security management is planning. What do your plans look like? And we really, to boil it down to its most simple, we have two pairs of three things. And so we look at security, emergency management, and business continuity, and then planning, training, and exercising in all three of those disciplines. So what is your, and again, you don't necessarily need to break them into three separate things. We won't be upset, or it's not a ding against you if you don't have a security plan, an emergency plan, and a business continuity plan. If they're all kludged together in one, or they're mixed some way, that's fine. But as long as the planning has gone on for those areas, and then there's training and exercise associated with that, you're doing just fine. Security areas and assets. So these are significant areas where nothing can go wrong there. If something bad happens in this particular area of the facility, we could be closed for a very long time. We found that public gathering places tend to be very resilient. There aren't too many places where, if I pull the plug or flip the switch on this, there isn't a workaround for that. But sometimes there are, depending on the type of facility. If there was a disruption to your wastewater removal, if you can't flush the toilet, what does that do? And so we kind of pay attention to some of that stuff. When we get into physical security, and everybody gets very excited about this, we do talk about the building envelope. Well, what is the facility and what does it look like? Is it in a building? Is it an open air space? And certainly that goes in there. How do you control vehicle access? What does parking look like? Site's security force, as far as, how do you constitute a security force? Intrusion detection, electronic security of all kinds, so CCTV, all of that. Access control. By and far, one of the most important things, and we spend a ton of time on access control, because if you don't know who's coming and going into your place, that is just about the worst thing that you can do when it comes to keeping the bad guys out. And so that's that. We certainly talk about security lighting. We'll discuss additional DHS products and services. We're always trying to promote what we have available. We do have a ton of really good stuff. The Protective Security Advisor's role is to kind of prioritize and put in an order that works for you, how that works. And so that's why we have that conversation. I mentioned before criticality. We'll usually take quite a few images, and they'll be included in the report that you receive. There's a PDF report that you get. We do talk about some cyber vulnerabilities, but it's very, very high level. And then your dependencies. So like I mentioned before, power, water, wastewater, natural gas, transportation, critical products are all in there and part of the conversation. So all that data is collected. And again, depending on the size of the facility, an IST, what we call Q&A or data collect, can take up to a day. The way I like to do it is especially if I haven't been to the facility before or done anything there before, I like the walk around. Let's go take a look at how does the facility function. I don't necessarily need the tour, but show me here's, walk me through the back of house. And what does that look like? And who has access to that? And what does a day look like for you? And then we sit down and answer any of the Q&A questions that I wasn't able to answer in the walk around. And so the deliverable is a dashboard, and we'll show you that here in a second. But there are two indices. So one is a protective measures index, and the other is a resilience measurements index. Both of them are very, very informative. The fact of the matter is the PMI, the Protective Measures Index, has a ton of low cost, no cost stuff that you can do differently and have some pretty dramatic improvements in your protective measures rating. The Resilience Measurement Index is also very, very good, but most of the stuff in that costs money, and a lot of money, because it has to do with business continuity, and all of that stuff is, you're creating duplicate facilities or areas or warm sites, or buying generators, or installing water storage, or you name it. But there's always a cost associated with that, and that can be very difficult. It's very valuable. It's one of the things that is a byproduct of the pandemic is, we've been talking about resilience for well over a decade. When I first started as a PSA in 2009, resilience was our thing, how important it was, business continuity. And it was the most uninteresting thing for our mission partners. It was very hard to have that conversation. And as a result of the pandemic, it's all we talk about now, resilience and business continuity. And so, I'm not grateful for the pandemic. I could have skipped the whole thing if anybody would have asked me. But that we're talking a lot about resilience and business continuity is an upside byproduct of that. And so we're enjoying those conversations. So that IST dashboard will identify some security gaps, because you'll see kind of here's where we rack and stack with our partners in every single measured question. So it's not every single question that we ask you, but there's remember the asterisk areas. We'll compare you to your peers that way. Fully anonymous. They don't know who you are. You don't know who they are, but it'll say, amongst X number of zoos and or aquariums, here's where you lay out with your peers. And that's really handy because, from my perspective, and this conversation usually comes up in every new administration of like, well, we need to develop regulation for critical infrastructure protection. And we really fight the battle that we can with that, because we would much rather have people understand the importance and the value of resilience than be required by a government entity to just do it. The lack of enthusiasm to abide by regulation does not create the kind of enthusiasm that we would like as far as that goes. Like I said, relation to similar facilities. And then it also allows you to track progress as you go, because the data is constantly evolving. So I've alluded to it quite a bit. And this is the infamous dashboard. This is the resilience management dashboard, but I just want to talk about the mechanics. And so I can't tell you how much pain and anguish and energy went into trying to come up with a way to visualize what we're trying to say. And so know that this, down to like which colors are most well received by folks, because, red is bad, green is good, all that kind of stuff. So we took like muted tones and all of that kind of stuff. And so always kind of, we read from left to right. And so overall RMI is the column on the left. There's dots and columns. The dots will show the black dot is the highest score of any single facility in that group. So this is, for those of you, that remember school, this was the kid who was blowing the curve. Everybody else is just trying to get by, and someone went and studied and screwed the curve up for everybody else. That's that. The gray dot is everybody. Right? That's the median for everybody. So that's where, on average, where folks landed. And then the white dot is the lowest score of any single facility. And so that gives you a sense of, here's what the spread is. The highest rating and the lowest rating. And then here's where everybody fell in that particular category. And so in their overall RMI, you have the two bars, the dark blue, and the light blue bar. The dark blue bar is the facility at the time of the assessment. So whatever day the data was collected, that's where the facility sat. In my opinion, probably one of the most powerful tools in here is the light blue bar. It is the facility scenario bar, and it allows you to go in and change your answers, right? So this is not a test. You can go back in and change your answers to see what happens as far as that goes. Let me see. So getting into the protective measures index, similar mechanics to the dashboard, lays out, your overall protective measures index, and then the areas that fall into that: physical security, security management, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see where you fall with your partners. So and it'll say, on this, it doesn't quite show, but on your dashboard, there'll be a little key in the bottom left corner that says, compared to 160 zoos, for example. And it'll show, the bars apply to you, the dots apply to your peer group. And then where you fall relative to that shows how that works. And so dark blue dot, or I'm sorry, black dot is the highest score of any single facility. White dot is lowest score of any single facility. And then the gray is the median, where pretty much everybody, if you look at the bell curve, that's kind of the peak of the bell curve as far as that goes. And so, this dashboard has had some changes made in it. So you can see that there's some variation between the facility as it exists and then the facility as a scenario changes. And that's really important to show, like, how do I get from A to B? I want to improve. And how do I do that? And you can go into these individual sections, open them up, see your answers, and start clicking on the different buttons to get that scenario bar to change, right? If I am below the average, and they don't have any of that demonstrated here, but it's, looking at physical security, the second group, dots and bars from left to right. Physical security, the facility at the time the question was answered was just slightly below the average. And they wanted to see, what can I do to get above average? Well, what does it take? And I can tell you, this is, there's no secret in this. This is the fact of the matter is, in our philosophy, that plan, train, exercise section, the work that you'll do in planning, training, and exercising in any of the areas, security, emergency management, or business continuity, every single one of those changes culture. It improves the way that the facility thinks about security and resilience. And so anything to do with planning, training, and exercising is going to give you a great big bump in that. And for example, in security management, there are two questions. One question is, are there post orders? So if you have a security force and the security force has a post, is there something in that post that says, this is what you're supposed to do? And that can be something as simple as an 3x5 index card that says, don't let anybody in, or, whatever. It doesn't need to be terribly sophisticated. This is not the storming of the beaches of Normandy. This is, how do we get one increment, one step better than we are? And so that's how that works. When you answer yes to that question, you go from 0 to 100. We don't care how sophisticated or advanced that post order is. Another question in there is there a security operations center of any kind? If you can say yes to that, you get 100. If you don't, you get a 0. So those two questions alone tend to give folks a very big bump if they don't have it. But it's a huge, huge thing. If there is no coordination for your security, then it's a bunch of independent folks hoping that nothing bad happens. And then if you have your operations, if you don't have an operations center, then there's no sharing of information as far as that goes. So there's that. I'm going to skip that. Now, if that sounds like just a lot, I can tell you that it is. There's some real work that goes into that, but it is worthwhile. Like, it's definitely not a waste of time. However, if you're looking to take a smaller bite, or you just don't have the resources or the time to commit to an infrastructure survey tool, we created the SAFE tool. So security assessment at first entry is kind of a first blush look at how that works. And so whether it's the IST or the SAFE, you get what's called options for consideration, things that we think you should do differently, but they're not recommendations. Like, we toil over the language and try and make it so that, anything that you do is good. We aren't regulatory. We're not going to come in and say you must and shall, and if you don't do this, you're a terrible human being, or this is a completely unsafe facility, or any of that kind of stuff. It's like, hey, compared to your peers, this is pretty good. You might want to consider doing that. And so both of those will generate those vulnerability options for consideration, and allow you to prioritize, who's responsible for what and how to get that done. And those are very handy. So again, the safe is just like the IST, but it's that, diet IST. It gets right down to the nitty gritty, but it also is, kind of big, broad strokes and not kind of the high resolution that you get from the IST. To accompany all of that, we have what's called the Infrastructure Visualization Platform. It's a graphic depiction of your facility. People will come in, think of it as Google Earth Street View on steroids. So we'll take satellite imagery, from Google Earth or some other provider, and build out a representation of your facility as far as that goes. Again, a little time consuming on your part. We have a team that comes in, uses spherical cameras to capture, again, like Street View, you're in that bubble and you can kind of rotate around and see everything, builds that out. One of the nicest things that this allows you to do is to capture hard to access areas, from like a zoo perspective. Should something happen in, the Lions area, well, we can't just like walk the SWAT team through the Lions area, but we can move the Lions out temporarily, bring the person in with the camera, shoot the picture and leave. And then we have a depiction of what that area looks like, so that should something happen there, the SWAT officers can work, or, fire department, EMS, emergency management, really not limiting that, but for the sake of the example, SWAT officers can look in there and say, like, if we had to do a rescue, what would that look like? What are we working against? What's working in our favor? And kind of work that out. And it's really quite good. I'm a little surprised that it's not as popular as it is. I think some people are thrown by the technical part of that, but with a little bit of practice, it can be very, very handy. So where can I find this stuff and so much more? And so if you go into that hometown security page, you'll see soft targets in crowded places, or we're calling public gathering, support for that. And our resource guide is in there. And it is the Cheesecake Factory menu of all of the CISA products and services that are available. And again, you do yourself a huge favor to spend some time kind of looking through that, seeing, kind of where do you want to get to? What are you trying to achieve from a security and resilience perspective? And then, if you're of a certain age, you remember getting like the Toys R Us catalog, and you'd go through and circle all your stuff, kind of go through and either print it and circle it, or virtually circle it, and then go and have a conversation with your protective security advisor. It's like, hey, I was looking through this guide, and here's some stuff that I think, we'd like to do first. And, what do we do to get on board with that? Again, our stuff is very good, and it's free. And there's a business model that said that, good, fast, and free, pick two, right? Think of it as like a triangle, good, fast, and free. You can get any two of those. So take your pick. Well, our stuff is good and free. So sometimes there's a wait. I'm not saying that there's a long wait for some of this stuff, especially when it comes to the ISTs. Most PSAs can pull those off within a month. But know that a lot of the stuff is in demand. I do want to kind of talk through cybersecurity resources because it is a popular topic. No shortage of ransomware conversations are had multiple times a day. So I do want to point some of this stuff out. So just like protective security advisors, we have cybersecurity advisors. There aren't as many of them as there are of us. We've got them outnumbered and hold the high ground, I like to say. But they're very good. And from a cyber perspective, they'll do some cyber assessments for you. They'll help you plan your response as far as, here's probably what you're most likely going to have to face. Let's make sure that you have a response capability to respond to that. Again, very similar to the protective security advisors as far as promoting, building those relationships, providing information and awareness, looking at, what is going on. We've certainly released more ransomware information than I've ever seen before in my very long and storied history with DHS. And so, if that's a concern or you're getting asked questions about that, please look at all of our ransomware information as far as that goes. Similar to our physical security philosophy, they've published the Cybersecurity Essentials. These are the fundamentals that any leader should have to pay attention to. And again, this is a PDF. You go right online, you can type in a Google search that says CISA Cyber Essentials, and you'll land on this, we call a placemat, where it talks about, what you should be doing as a cyber leader. And then it has, kind of a checklist. And so if you ever ask for feedback on this, do me a huge favor and tell them, hey, it would be swell if you would uncheck the blocks so I can check them for myself. It cracks me up that they went in and put blocks and check marks. It's total head scratcher. Anyway, but it's still very good. And it really does lay out, who's involved in this and what should they be doing. And I think it's really, really handy. If you're looking for like an entry level version of cybersecurity, our Stop Think Connect program is right there. I mean, it is for everybody, 8 to 80 as far as that goes. And so we try and promote that as much as possible, because it is, most of the vulnerabilities that do get exploited are not super sophisticated, exotic hacking type of stuff. It's, clicking on links for email. I'm no kind of cyber person, but I can tell you, 90% of cyber problems are created by clicking on links that you shouldn't. So this puts a lot of that together. Suspicious activity reporting of all kinds is a huge bang for your buck kind of thing. And so paying attention to, what is suspicious and who do you tell is a great big deal. The list of cybersecurity assessments is here. And again, kind of going from what is the most strategic kind of general to highly, highly technical. And again, this is all online. Don't think that you have to take furious notes. Again, it would be nothing for your protective security advisor to put you in touch with your cybersecurity advisor to talk about, what works. Some of the stuff that I think really should be pointed out is the cyber resilience review. This is very high level, like how is your network configured and who has access to it and how often do you patch, and, kind of really run of the mill type cybersecurity stuff that folks don't do. And so having that done is a real big eye opener. Another one that I really love is the phishing campaign assessment. With some coordination and developing of rules of engagement, they will run a phishing campaign against your organization. And when they click on the link that they're not supposed to click on, it sends them to training. And I think that is excellent. And so lots of that. Plus, they do some highly technical stuff to include penetration testing. I cannot foot stomp this enough that all of the stuff below the phishing campaign is really good and it's free, and the waiting list is a mile long. And so just know that going into that. If you're not familiar with if you see something, say something, again, I kind of referenced earlier, suspicious activity reporting of all kinds is huge. And from a bang for your buck perspective, when people ask me like, what's the one thing I can do for my facility that'll have just an immediate, visceral, unbelievable impact on our security posture and being aware of stuff. Turning every person that comes to your facility, whether they're the public, your employees, vendors, contractors, whomever, into a sensor that says, hey, with a little bit of training, I can say that doesn't look right. And I know who to call. And when I call them, they're expecting my call. And then a few days later, they'll call me back and say, that was pretty good. Or, hey, turned out to be nothing, but we appreciate you calling. Like that feedback loop, that suspicious activity reporting process is just it doesn't get any better than that. For the amount of good that it does and what it costs you, it's a sound investment. And I'm sure I can get an amen from folks that have suspicious activity reporting in place already. Talk about that quite a bit. All right, I can shut up for a minute and do what I really like, is listening to what you have to say. on that. Grab my contact information if you like. Also, Ashley has my contact information, and Ashley, you're more than welcome to turn that over to whoever might need it. But that's the end of me banging my face, and let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. So for those on the line, if you can put in any questions into the Q&A area, we'll be able to go with them from there. Additionally, if you have something that you'd like to speak or you'd like to vocally ask your question, just raise your hand and we will be able to call on you that way. And for those that asked, yes, the webinar recording will be made available later. So we haven't gotten any questions in just yet, but while we're waiting, I did want to ask you, Jeff, we've heard a couple of folks talking lately about increases in barrier breaches, just from the general public during the day, sometimes at night with trespassing. And could you say anything about how this tool might help in navigating that increased type of activity?
Absolutely. No, that's a great, excellent question. I wish I would have, I was thinking about it while you're asking, and I'm like, I probably should have made up a couple of questions for you to ask, but you're way more better than I am when it comes to that. And that's a really good question. So if the problem is we're having people breach our access control, what can we do for that? And in the IST, it'll give you options, right? If your access control is just turnstiles, right? We run into this constantly. If your exit isn't secured in any way and people can walk in through the exit, that's a problem. And so in the IST, it'll say, what does your access control look like? Is it this? Is it that? And it'll be like in orders of progression. So we don't have anything at all is an option. We have single hip level turnstiles with no other thing. We have full people height turnstiles so that they can't be jumped over. And it explores all of that in a bunch of different directions. It talks about, how are your doors secured? And here's kind of the minimum. And then here's what we think is the maximum. And that's good. However, it gets even better because when you do an IST and you have your dashboard, you can put yours in and then go and see like, well, how do I compare to my peers? Right. And a lot of the times if, we're all grownups, we understand that there's budget limitations and we were kind of talking about this before we started the presentation where, this is just an odd time. We're short resources. The supply chain's all goofed up. So we're not getting the stuff that we need when we used to, this normally takes a week to get here. Now it's taken a month, or we have to find a whole other supplier altogether. And so it's a really kind of strange time. So it allows you to say, well, what are my peers doing? What does this look like? And the nice thing about the data in the IST is every day PSAs are doing ISTs. And so the data is constantly refreshing so that we're seeing the change. And the example I give as far as changes, as far as that goes, is when we first started doing these, it was still physical lock and key for most places. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was eons ago when it comes to technology. And so, we have this really robust, like, do you track and manage who has keys, and do you follow through on this, that, or the other? And, has all these key kind of questions where now we look in the data and like nobody has keys because everybody's using proximity cards or something like that. So because the technology allows us to make that not a key with the press of a button. So if a person is terminated, leaves, or, whatever, it goes on vacation, that card, if it gets stolen, controls that access. And so the IST allows you to take that very good question, like, how do I solve this problem? And go into the IST and say, well, where do I compare with my peers? Like, are we all making kind of the same mistake? Are we on par with what everybody else is doing? Or, oh, by the way, everybody else has more access control than we do. And that makes for, people like, oh, we failed. You didn't fail. It showed you a picture and allows you to go to the folks that hold the purse strings and say, did you know that compared to 100 and some zoos, everybody does this better than us. And the data is virtually irrefutable, right? It's not like, oh, I called a buddy of mine and he said he did this other thing. DHS, in partnership with Argonne National Lab, developed this product that collects data. And when we participated in their program, their data showed us that this was the way that it was. And oh, by the way, you can call your protective security advisor and they can have that kind of uncomfortable conversation with your senior leadership or backstop you on it. So that's like having that access to that stuff, especially at no charge, is really something. I said earlier, that's, as a taxpayer, I swell with pride a little bit because you can't get that anywhere else for no amount of money. There's no company that does 1,000 ISTs a year and has the data to make the statements that we do. So super long answer to a very good question, but it's a good question. So it took a lot to unpack. What else do we have?
Awesome. Thank you. The next question that we have in, and I'm just scrolling up to find that real quick again, sorry, is what are some of the key vulnerabilities that you've noticed in zoological facilities, if that's something that you're able to discuss?
Well, I'll just talk in general, because there's a lot of commonality like to any of these kind of public gathering facilities. And I'll tell you, access control is hands down the place where there needs to be the most improvement. I tell folks that, the enemy of security or resilience is not the bad guy. It's convenience. If the security improvement is inconvenient, it is less durable. But that's why we like planning, training, and exercising, because that changes the culture where it's like, hey, smoker rocks, perfect example, right? If the smokers understand that when they prop a door open to go smoke, that creates a vulnerability where anybody can walk in. And as soon as the bad guys figure out that that door is constantly prop open, then they can exploit that. But if they understand that it's like, all I got to do is swipe to get back in, and I don't create a vulnerability, then I'm more bought into what's going on. And so that's a big deal. I think that when it comes to really looking at access control and making it as stringent as tolerable, and sometimes that takes kind of doing it in phases so that it happens over time, so that people don't just completely freak out. But I can tell you, bar none, access control is a big deal.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think our senior veterinary advisor, Dr. Nadler, had something that she wanted to ask. So go ahead, Dr. Nadler.
Well, Jeff, I wanted to thank you so much for your presentation. I've got some background in risk assessment, both with disease as well with, looking at facilities and preparedness, planning and all that sort of stuff. But I wanted to really emphasize on something that you had said, that training and exercises are so important to lead to increased resilience to bad things, right? So an example I wanted to share was a number of years ago, we did an internet exercise looking at an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza in zoos. Now, granted, this isn't, terrorist security or anything like that, but the example was one of the lessons learned from that exercise is that a number of the zoos that participated did not have respiratory protection plans in place that would be absolutely needed if veterinary staff was managing sick birds with this potentially zoonotic disease agent. Well, the folks that were playing in the exercise were veterinarians in animal care, but they used the outcomes from that exercise to exactly what you said, go to the people with the purse strings. And they were able to say, look, from the outcomes of this exercise, we need to have a certain number of people respiratory fit protected, and therefore it's going to allow us to do our jobs better. And guess what? the people with the purse strings said, yes, we understand the need, and they were able to get a respiratory protection program set up. So that is just one little example from our world that shows that data and examples and lessons learned can change the culture, which is exactly what you were talking about. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the plug. Yeah, no, that's an excellent example. I hope that resonates with folks. The exercise piece, the training piece does tend to fall off. I can't tell how many facilities I've gone to of all kinds that are, just swollen with pride when it comes to like, look at our amazing plan. And okay, so what do you do with it? We wrote it, done. And you're like, well, there's a little more, to that. And so adding that training and exercise component to the planning process is just is a great big deal. And the exercises can have some really great outcomes like that.
Awesome, thank you. So we do have a question. Someone asked if an organization shares information, and I'm sorry, my dog is scratching right now. So sorry, I've got jingles.
I know someone that can help you with that. Anyway, just kidding.
If an organization shares information with CISA and enters into a PCII agreement, are there federal grants available to help address vulnerabilities discovered through that process?
The short answer is no. However, so there isn't a grant process. Like if you participate in the IST, you are eligible for grants. That's not the case. However, participating in the IST will help you give a more focused and a reference for grants that you may apply to. For example, depending on how your facility is organized, there's a nonprofit grant program. If you are owned by the city, then you're eligible for other grant programs. So it kind of depends on the facility and kind of how it fits in kind of the ecosystem of grants and that kind of stuff. So no is the kind of the short answer to that. However, it does help inform grants that are available out there, but there is no direct linkage.
Thank you. And I know you had mentioned that individuals are welcome to share any information that they receive, that the PCII is mainly that CISA can't share any of that information. But when that comes to other federal grants, if they are applying, are there sort of general recommendations that come to folks that are enrolled in that program for maybe what they should or shouldn't share if they're including some of that documentation in an application?
It's really kind of the level of comfort and it depends as far as that goes. It depends on kind of what you're asking for. It depends on, what the grant is and who's involved in that. It depends on, again, where the facility falls in kind of the ecosystem of stuff. If it's owned by the city, then it's a public entity and it is eligible for grants. But if it's privately owned, then less so. And so it becomes, I wish I could give you, a direct answer, but it just depends.
Thank you very much. And just for participants on the line, just a reminder, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to enter in questions. You do have the option to ask those anonymously if you would like. Additionally, if you have a question or if you've participated in one of these programs and have something that you'd like to say, you can raise your hand and we can call on you to speak aloud. But I'll fall back on another question that I've heard recently in other conversations. I know we've heard from some folks that there's some difficulty gathering buy-in from leadership at their institutions and enrolling in this types of programs, either one, because of a concern that they would be obligated to make recommended improvements that they are found, and then also just concerns about the time involved in participating in that. Could you speak to either of those concerns?
Sure. So leadership buy-in is a constant problem with security. And it goes back to it's inconvenient. It disrupts the natural order of things. And while very necessary, can be uncomfortable at first. And I use the simile of, like physical training. It's like, I want to run a marathon. okay, we're going to go run a mile. Well, that seems kind of long. And, like we don't embrace necessarily what is necessary to achieve the goal that we want. And so that leadership buy-in is really important. And one of the things that I tend to recommend when there's less buy-in than we would like is to do a tabletop with the senior leadership. Nothing too terrible, nothing too long, but like an hour of let's explore a scenario that either has happened or could happen, and just kind of turn the lights on for the senior leadership who in the back of their mind may like wrap their head around the idea, but until they have like a conscious involved conversation on the topic, don't necessarily wrap their head around it. And so that is a good way of doing that. And then, when it comes to hesitancy and participating in the program, there is no obligation. We may come back and say, hey, it was really great working with you. I hope the IST was helpful. By chance, have you improved anything? Have you changed anything? And like I can tell you that, we don't get to work with fun places like zoos and aquariums all the time. So, if you do make a change or do something, any PSA that's worth their salt will be like, so what did you do? Like, how did that work? What is, like, I'd like a little feedback, but there's no, like, we're never going to come in and be like, hey, look, we told you that you should have done this. Did you do it or not? Like, that is never, ever anything that we do. It's because it doesn't work, right? I talked about how, we're kind of not a huge fan of regulation because it lacks the enthusiasm that is necessary to do good security. And so, if there's certainly no obligation, we're not going to come back and hold you accountable. I can tell you after being a PSA for a very long time is we get it. Like, we know that there's challenges. We know that there's leadership turnover. We know that there's budget constraints. We know that there's, shiny object syndrome where it's hard to keep leadership focused on the day-to-day mundane, incredibly important things that happen because something new and exciting has happened. And so, to the degree that we get it. And we have some things that can make that helpful.
Thank you so much. We did get a question in from an attendee. They've asked, what are the pros, cons of uniformed security staff versus plainclothes staff, or a mix of the two? And does the political climate or public perception of law enforcement in a region have any bearing on this?
Yes. So it depends. I don't mean to be vague and evasive on this, but it really kind of depends on the type of facility and where it's located, what kind of issues you're experiencing. Sometimes a person in uniform in the right location is all it really needs to be that deterrence of what's going on. Sometimes, if it's a matter of theft, having plainclothes folks to do that works very well. It depends on what your security posture is. And this is, Jeff Murray's opinion does not reflect the views or opinions of the Department of Homeland Security of the federal government anyway. However, if you're not a badge and gun person with the ability to arrest and take immediate action, then I want you to be an amazing observer and reporter. And so I'm leaning more towards plainclothes stuff if appropriate, because they're just observing and pushing information into a place that has responders that can do things. So, to be very clear, I'm not saying plainclothes is better, but in an optimal environment where I have a fully functioning security operations center and I have armed responders and folks that are capable to deal with situations that aren't that are EMS and fire and, all that kind of stuff. If I can blend folks in and have them observe and report really, really, really well, that's really good. But that's not saying uniformed folks are bad. It just depends on the type of facility and the circumstance that it's experiencing. And so, it depends is the answer. And I know that's kind of a cop out, but it just does. And then, when it comes to political climate and the perception of law enforcement, I don't know. It just, you kind of have to feel it out. There's certain places where that might not resonate as well. But, from a law enforcement background, we never had the kind of public perception problems that some departments have. But we were also very, very, very involved in the community. As a neighborhood team leader, my job was to know everybody. And so I knew all the business owners, I knew all the civic association leaders, I knew all the politicians, I knew the judges that were responsible for the area, I knew everybody, and I don't know that, if the area that you're in, law enforcement isn't doing that, then I think it could be an issue. But if they are, it's probably less of an issue. So who knows?
Awesome. Thank you for the thoughtful answer and impressive disclaimer that you did there. You really got that out very
Yes,
quickly.
I use that quite a bit.
I'm sure. For those on the line, again, you can ask questions anonymously, and we are still accepting questions in there. Something that I was curious about while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I know obviously a lot of the focus is on site security, certainly in light of COVID and with the types of species in our care, disease security and biosecurity is another concern. We've had conversations with some of our partners in the CRIMEPI unit at FBI just regarding the potential for zoos and aquariums and the need to monitor against potential bioterror threats. Is that something that is looked at in any of the tools that you mentioned today?
Yes. So when we talk about significant areas and assets, and so that is covered in there. When it comes to assessing your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, we do talk about, do you have, biological sensing equipment? Yes or no? And again, we're not saying that you should or shouldn't, but depending on your answer, when you get your dashboard, it'll say, hey, most of your peers have this bioterrorism protection thing in place and you don't. And not saying that you should, but if they do and you don't, you should have a very good answer as to why you do or you don't.
Awesome, thank you. And we don't have any additional questions right now. Just going back to something that I've heard folks ask before, obviously everything is confidential with these tools. If you're working with a facility and they'd like assistance from their protective security advisor to help make more connections with emergency management contacts, I know that's something a lot of our facilities have been working on, especially with all the turnover rates that we've been seeing post-pandemic. Is that something that you could help assist with as well?
100%, without a doubt. And a lot of the times, again, as well as anybody, zoos and aquariums are awesome. They're fun places to be. And so I can tell you that if you would want to host a tabletop exercise and bring your emergency managers and your responders out, I'm sure there'll be a line around the corner because we're tired of looking at office buildings. To be blunt, it's like, hey, this is new and different and interesting. Let's go and do that. So your protective security advisor would absolutely be willing and able to tie you into everybody. And the really good contacts. I'm not trying to disparage the day-to-day work that police, fire, EMS, and emergency management do, but you got to kind of come in at a certain level before they really pay attention to your facility. Because if and again, not disparaging regular people on patrol, but they have a different job. But if you bring in the special operations commander and some of their staff to kind of see what's going on, they have resources that apply to you. And this is a problem that they will have to solve. It'll land in their lap. And so getting the right people from those organizations in the room is something that the PSAs can do without breaking a sweat.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I'm going to do one more call for questions for anybody. If there aren't any, we can end a couple of minutes early. But something I wanted to just ask you again, Jeff, is so you may or may not know Obviously, zoos and aquariums, a lot of those facilities are regulated by the United States Department of Agriculture. I know that we talked a little bit earlier. Oh, and we do have some more questions coming in. But I know
Good.
we talked a little bit earlier about sort of the line between the agriculture sector versus commercial facility sector in terms of how folks are considered in the IST tool or anything. Are they just compared with other facilities that house animals? Are they compared amongst other cultural type institutions? Does it kind of bridge those two sectors?
I hate giving this as the regular answer, but it depends. Yes is the short answer, but that might not be 100% accurate as far as we try not to draw very specific lines. So if a facility is a zoo and an aquarium, right, it has both types of exhibits or attractions or whatever the correct term is, that might be looked at differently than a place that is strictly a zoo or strictly an aquarium. And then depending on how many zoos or aquariums we have in our database, we tend to try and parse them out into size or some other kind of variation. And so if that's a question or a concern for the facility, make sure you raise that to the protective security advisor, because then they can go back to Argonne National Labs and say, hey, Zoo X is unique in this way. Is there a way that we can adjust their comparison group to be more accurate? Because Argonne doesn't know. They don't delve into that too much. They really rely on the protective security advisors to ask the questions and to characterize correctly, and they do a very good job of that. But it's something that could be addressed, I guess, is the short answer on that, but it's not built in.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Next question we got in is, are you seeing an increase in targeted attacks on veterinary hospitals? And do you have any assessment tools to help with medical devices and IoT security?
No and yes. So not necessarily like pretty much everybody's being targeted. So there's no one bad guy. So it's this wide variety and swath of bad guys attacking virtually whomever they can based on their vulnerability. So it's not necessarily any kind of facility. It's bad guy X has an axe to grind with this type of facility. They explored and did their research and found that a facility of that type that they have an issue with has low protective measures and is able to be exploited, and that's how the attacks happen. And so it's different in that regard. And then the Internet of Things is just a hot mess, and I'm sure it's not just medical devices. It's anything that's connected and not protected. It's only a matter of time before it gets exploited, and there's a problem. I mean, it's like I said, resiliency is the hot question, right? Hot topic of discussion right now, just because the bad guys are evolving faster than our protective measures can develop. We're not seeing the level of enthusiasm. Kind of this is a team effort. And so there's plenty of, non-believers or folks that don't, I'm not going to spend money on that. No one's attacked me. Why should I have to worry about it? And then there you go. And, that happens a lot more than we would like. And so we're, that's a lot of why we are doing the job that we're doing, so that we can say, hey, everybody needs to get on board with this, or, and if you don't, it's not going to end well for you. We really want, we want to make the environment difficult enough for the bad guys that they have to take more risks to be successful. And that allows us to identify them and act upon them. Whereas, think of it as, if everybody just leaves the front door of their house open and then leaves the lights on, and then they walk out of their house and go wherever they're going, and the bad guys come in and take all your stuff, well, you're not really helping yourself or anybody else by doing that. And so we're trying to get everybody to turn off your lights, close and lock your doors. To be a little oversimplistic, but not too much. That's what we're looking for.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time to come out and share with our community today. We don't have any further questions. So at this time, I am going to end the webinar. But if anyone wants to stay for the last 10 minutes, have any further questions that you're just thinking on, feel free to do that and we will keep the line open. But thank you again so much. Getting some great thank yous and comments in here for you. And we will
Great.
share your contact information, the recording with attendees from today. And we will share feedback with you. An automatic feedback survey should pop up for everyone as you leave the webinar. So feel free to give us your feedback there. Thank you
That's
again.
great. Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.